Three, two, one, go.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Triad of the Forest podcast, the podcast from three Puerto Rican friends coming together to do deep dives into Star Wars and other nerd-related media. This is season 2, episode. What episode are we on? 23?
24, I believe.
24. And today, joining us to talk about great Star Wars music is Xanthe from Star Wars Music Minute. Welcome, Xanthe.
Welcome.
Oh,
It's so good to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. It's so cool to have you here with us to talk about different part of Star Wars, because I know a lot. I mean, everyone's familiar, right, with John Williams and the Star Wars music and how iconic it is, but it's always kind of cool to discuss it from a different point of view, because I think a lot of people just look at a surface level, so to speak, appreciation of the music, which is fine, obviously, but to talk to someone that has kind of a deeper, let's say, academic understanding of it gives a much richer perspective. So thank you, for joining us and gifting us with some of your knowledge on the Star Wars music lore, so to speak. Before diving into it, though, we always want to get to know our guests a little bit and do a mini interview portion. So us and obviously the people listening can, get to know you. So we always like to start with a little bit of your background, who you are, what, did you go to school for music? What do you do? All that type of stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Oh, sure. Just okay. I've played music since I was 8 or something. Just as soon as I remember being alive, basically, I knew that music was a way that I perceived the world. And I don't know how I really knew that, because my parents never forced me to play or even asked me to play. It all came from me. I begged them to let me play, because I saw music and I would be I want to do that. And I don't really know what my parents made of that, but just seeing people play music just made me really, I don't know, I thought it was magic. I thought it was a sort of magic. And I'm autistic, and I had a lot of trouble speaking as a kid, and I was also very shy, and I felt like expressing myself came easier, and I could really dive into music, and that felt really like a thing that was special for me. I had a special bond with it that I didn't have with anything else, and that I realized pretty early on that it was kind of special amongst peers and everything too. So it always came very naturally to me. So yeah,
awesome.
So I've just always played music. That's just always been part of my life, and it's almost I just haven't really stopped. I mean, I did try to stop a little bit after. I did try to quit once. I mean, it wasn't quit, but I tried to take a break when I graduated from college, but the break didn't really last long.
Right.
It's just meant to be.
Because you're driven, right,
to me. Yeah.
do it.
So I'm a pianist, violinist, and composer mainly.
Ah.
But I also, sing, songwrite, play guitar, dabble in other instruments.
Jesus.
Very impressive. Very much. I can't play a single instrument, so.
Well, we all can play, I don't know. I was going to say something
voice.
stupid, so I'm not going to say. Exactly.
Can all make noise.
It's interesting, though. I mean, I don't know if I always I'm reading the High Republic books, so like my brain's just plugged into that part of Star Wars right now. But the way you were talking about it, it reminded me a lot of like the Jedi, right, of the High Republic,
Well,
because one of them.
I've always actually felt like my musical abilities were always felt like an analog to like being a Jedi, because people will also talk about like, you know, when you're like a force sensitive, or like if you're like a youngling, or like you're someone who from an early, like you just know that there's something like kind of special about you, or like
Right.
you have like some sort of like something that you're picking up on. And that's always how it felt like with me with music. But also I feel like this is like a little bit of a tangent, but I also feel like force sensitivity is very connected to like neurodivergence and a lot of those things. So I also feel like just as an autistic person, I was just period very sensitive to like senses and just like things happening, whether it was music or like just being able to like hear the fact that the oven is like 2 rooms down. Like that's
Right.
I've just always been very attuned to like things that no one else can really hear, or and you know, there's bad sides to it because it just like makes me so
Overwhelmed.
frustrated sometimes and just like
Right.
busy in my
Too
mind.
much.
But then if it's channeled in like into a way like being able to play music, then that's to me sort of like how when young people, like, you know, babies or whatever, who are force sensitive and they can't control, like if they can't control themselves, and I think that is sort of like a benefit to them being plucked from their families, you know, even if it's like
Right.
you could frame it as like stealing babies from their families, or it could be also like these families have kids that have these powers that could hurt themselves and people,
Right,
and
right.
they need to kind of be channeled and in a supportive place where other people are like them. And so that's kind of how I feel as a musician too, and as an autistic person, just like I like relate to so much of forced stuff. And I also relate to the fact that like now in other media where, I mean, this is not new. I don't know why people like talk about it like it's new still, but like obviously there's ways to feel the force other than just being a Jedi. And there's many manifestations of it. Some of them are more full blown and some of them are more trained than others. And that's how I see my role as a musician, is like everyone can like, the force is in all, it's like life.
All of us, yeah.
Music, everyone has like a connection to music too. Like it might not be like as hypersensitive, or it might not be like as channeled into like training, but still there is like something that everyone can offer, and there is like everyone has sort of a unique connection to it, and music is in everything. Music is everywhere, so it's definitely not relegated to just like Jedi or, you know, just trained musicians. So yeah, when you mentioned the High Republic, I know like there's like a Jedi that talks about feeling the force through music, and I'm like,
exactly.
yeah, for sure.
I mean, I think it's super interesting, right? I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's exactly, I mean, better than how I was going to say it. So thank you for that. Which leads me to kind of like the next question, right, that we have for you, which is like, obviously you were telling us how you're involved with music, right? You're a violinist, you're a pianist, you're a composer. You went to school for that. So like, when you got into Star Wars, was it like at the same time that you were with music? How did like Star Wars start plugging into like your passion for music? Was it always like at the same time that the two things were in your life, or was it like at one point that all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, these two things like are one basically?
Oh, they've just always been like, Star Wars has always been my like, okay, Star Wars has always been my number one passion, period. Like since I was a little kid, I grew up with the prequels, and I read all the, like before Disney stuff, like I was reading like Extended Universe, or you know, Expanded Universe, and like really, I was like a super fan since elementary school. And music, I actually don't see music as a passion. I see music as just like a part of me. Like, you know, it's like a Jedi wouldn't say the force is their passion, or like, you know, fighting is their passion. Like music is just like the way that I communicate. And then Star Wars is like is like a special interest, and that's like always been my favorite thing. Like it's almost weird. People sometimes think like because I'm into Star Wars, I might also like X media, like a different media, like I don't know,
Right.
any franchise. And the truth is, like, I'm not really a nerd in other stuff. Like, I'm very singularly focused on Star Wars.
Mhm.
I don't know anything about Marvel, DC,
Okay.
Lord of the Rings. Like,
Mhm.
it's really weird. Like, Star Wars is just like, I've just always been obsessed with Star Wars. Like,
It's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No complaints here. But speaking to that, then, like how like both things, right, music and Star Wars are like so ingrained right into who you are. How would you say that then Star Wars influences what you do musically, if it does, like at all? I mean, did it influence how you were getting into music? Uh, or does it influence how you're doing music now? I don't know if that question is
that makes
making sense.
sense. It's a fair question. And actually, it didn't really cross paths with music for me much at all
Mhm.
until like
Okay.
I started this channel, or until like, I think the best things with me, or a lot of things with me, happen by accident.
Mhm.
And so just naturally, because of my Star Wars ness, in the past, years, I've often gone on other shows to talk about Star
Mhm.
Wars. And in going on like other shows, like Star Wars Minute, um,
Mhm.
I have every now and then, like I would, since I'm also a musician, be able to be
Mhm.
like, oh, and by the way, the music's also doing this thing. And so like it just naturally was just like I would be there to offer Star Wars commentary, but then like
Mhm.
naturally, just because I noticed music, like that would just come up, and it would just,
Right.
and after doing that enough times, like uh, it like it took me years to make this realization of like, oh, I didn't realize, like, because every time I would say that, people would be like surprised, or they'd be like, no one ever talks about this, or like,
Mhm.
wow, like we want to hear more about this. And and it didn't click with me because I was like, it's not that big of a deal. It's just like a
Mhm.
normal, it's just
Just
Exactly.
there.
So
another
how
thing,
Yeah.
you've
like
always
whatever.
perceived it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it didn't like really realize, I didn't really realize that if I don't know, that it was something that I could, it was almost too obvious that I didn't really think of
right.
even putting them together until like I started Star Wars Music Minute just, this past February. So,
So
but yeah.
perfect seg into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about Star Wars Music Minute, how that came about, and like what your, I mean, obviously the focus is music, but what's
Yeah.
your spin on it, right? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, that's a good question because so Star Wars Music Minute is predominantly a podcast, but it's also a YouTube channel,
Mhm.
in which I, have discussions with people about the music and sound design in the Star Wars universe.
Mhm.
And on the main podcast, and I mean, by main podcast, I mean like the part that's also like cross-posted to podcast platforms.
Mhm.
Um, I actually go through the films 5 cinematic minutes at a time.
Okay.
So,
Oh wow. Okay.
so normally when people talk about Star Wars music, it's very like in concrete terms, like the soundtrack albums, or like
Mhm.
Mhm.
this particular track, or this particular theme,
Mhm.
or it's sort of like the greatest hits of
Mm.
Star
Right.
Wars.
Right.
And something that people are often surprised by is like I've never been a soundtrack listener. Like I've
Mhm.
never I the only Star Wars soundtrack like I ever had at home was like The Phantom Menace.
Mhm.
I truly have not even listened to all the soundtracks, like as well, I think at this point I have, but like just as albums.
Right.
And um but I love Star Wars, so like
Mhm.
for me I see it in the context of the film. And for me that's where I'm really interested in, is how
Mhm.
music influences, and how music is just part of the the piece as a whole, like the film as a
Right.
whole, or the media as a whole. So on Star Wars Music Minute, for example, like season 1, we're wrapping up pretty soon, but we were going through The Last Jedi.
Mhm.
And so the first
Okay.
episode was just like talking about the music and sound in minutes 1 through 5 of The Last Jedi. And then the next
Mhm.
week
Mhm.
is like minutes 6 through 10. So like basically it's like it's a very long-term like way of seeing things, and it's also a way of like not ignoring the little things that no one wants to remember, like all those scenes, or it might just be like 5 minutes of random action stuff that is hard to categorize because it's not really a main theme and it's like something else is happening. And I think those are really interesting moments to say like, hey, this is also part of our movie going experience. It's not just like the full track that you hear on the album. Like when you're actually watching it, it's actually buried here. And actually it's also really interesting, the mix of it. And it's also really interesting how it differs, like because it actually has a lot of cuts when you view it. And it's also interesting when you watch it, how you wouldn't get it from just listening to the track. But when you watch it, like there might be parts where there are intentional spaces for sound design and it kind of goes together on purpose. Right. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that's a more compelling way at least for me, because I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm a fan. Like, I'm not here. I'm not, I don't see myself as an academic to break down, do all of the analysis of the discrete tracks or like of the score as a whole, because I also think overanalyzing from an academic standpoint does a disservice to the material a lot of the time, because analysis is subjective. It's always subjective, whether you know music theory or not. So I kind of got a little bit tired of hearing a lot of, on YouTube and other places, people who know about music theory and music analysis giving their takes on Star Wars music from a place of authority, in which it seems like it's coming from a place of authority, and that means that is so. I think that's really not true. And I just
that is the only way to
those takes. So on the show I have musicians, but I also have like mostly non-musicians who are just fans, and then I send them the 5-minute clip that we're going to be talking about, and then we can just talk about it like they, people, you can use whatever language that they use and help, and then we can talk about how we each understand it in different ways. And it doesn't, I can offer analysis or we can just like, go back and forth, because I guess my specific aim with the channel is not just to be like the person who explains all of the Star Wars music, although I can give you my take on them. It's also to just like help fans like bring more people to the conversation about music, because Star Wars fans are always so scared to talk about music other than like really like it, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know anything about it, so I don't want to say too much. And I think let's just talk about it. Like, and I think,
I think that's really cool, going at it from the angle of a fan, of somebody that just actually loves the material. And it's true, because obviously like I said, I don't know how to play a single instrument, but just because you can't make music doesn't mean you can't appreciate it. And it doesn't mean that you don't get enriched by it. The media doesn't get enriched by it.
Also doesn't mean that you can't have insights about it. Like there, one of the episodes of my show, I think it was episode 11 or something, but it was like, I got listener questions being like, why does the music on Canto Bight remind me of this other track? And like, there were like all these other references that people were like, why does it remind me of this? So like, I went into it, like I played, it was like, one of them was like an old rock song. One of them was like a Super Mario Kart song. One of them was like, some other things. And I was like, okay, let's talk about that, because, everyone is saying like, I don't know anything, so I'm probably wrong, but like, what am I hearing in it? And I'm like, well, I guess my role is also to just like help frame conversations and help direct conversations and help ask the right questions that can help people make connections. Because I think the benefit of analyzing music is not to learn more about the music, it's to learn more about yourself. Because it reveals our own lens when we see it, when we interpret different things in the music. So so in that episode it was like I would played a few examples back to back, and then we kind of pieced out like, okay, we might be you might be picking up on a similar rhythmic pattern that they share. You might be picking up on like this specific instrument that they both have that is like a unique instrument, like steel pans or things like that. And there might be these other things. And like, as someone who didn't know all of the references, that wouldn't have been a connection that I made. But for someone who even doesn't know music, if they're able to make this connection between the Canto Bight music and the Super Mario Kart, like coconut, whatever music,
right?
If they're able to have that intuition, even if they can't describe it, like that intuition oftentimes like is worth trusting, and there actually like is something to it. And moreover, if you like that connection that you're hearing and you just want to understand what they have in common, then if someone like me can maybe like help you understand what the connection is, then you can seek more of that thing without kind of like looking
Not
and
knowing.
yeah,
Like not knowing like what. Yeah.
what the
Okay.
through line is. So then
So it's
I mean,
like
I think it's
like
super
giving.
interesting. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I mean, I didn't mean to cut you. I was just like listening to that is like super interesting to me because at least for me personally, when I'm watching like the movies or the shows, like not to say that the music is on the background, but like I'm not actively like trying to pick up all those things, and it's maybe it's like how I relate to the media, right? So like in my first viewing of something, it's like the music's just there kind of to support the story, and I'm not consciously cognizant of what the music is doing, even though I might subconsciously know what's happening because it evokes like a certain reaction. But it's only like on a second viewing or a third viewing where I'm like, okay, now let's like actively listen to that music, that I'm just able to start picking up things. So I think it's super interesting to see like how people relate to how they're perceiving the music or the sound design or something in a lot of these movies, because like for me it has to be like really active process. So like I really appreciate like people that are able to just pick those things up and, and put into words the things that like I'm not able to personally describe, because it's such a abstract thing, right? At least for me personally.
well, it's abstract until you can pick up on patterns and sort of, and that's something that I guess I try to help people pick up on patterns more, because it takes me like active processing too for a lot of it. But for some things, like I won't even have to try just because I'm used to hearing like a certain pattern like that. So it just really easily, it's, effortlessly, because I'm just used to that. And sort of like a really trippy thing sometimes is I think when we listen to or watch media and we feel impacted by the music, sometimes it like I think I don't know, as a society, as fans, like to find a reason why, like we like to find justifications, we like to find reasons why we like things. And we like to know who's responsible for it too. And the weird thing is that like, sure, we might like the music somewhere because the music is really effective and the music is really good. We also might really be moved by the music in a place because we have a subconscious connection to another time we heard music like it and we're moved that other time. And, maybe that time we were moved just because we've also heard that another time. So I guess what I'm getting at there is like a lot of our, like, I would say most, if not all of our reactions to music are, you trace it back subconsciously, and it's all related to our particular acculturation. It's just all cultural context. There is no such thing as like objectively good music. It works. If it works, it's because we understand the cultural context. Like think of Bad Batch. Think of when Cad Bane shows up and you hear the Western style music.
Right.
For a lot of people, that was very evocative. I bet it would not have been evocative if the demographics of people watching the Bad Batch
didn't have that
didn't
background.
have if it didn't evoke the Western shootout feel. But because we have that, like, for just someone else it might have been super weird to be like, why are we hearing like rattlesnakes and church bells here? Like, where did this come from? But then you trace it back, you're like, oh yeah, if you trace it back far enough,
Spaghetti
the church
westerns
bells and like the church bells were because that was like part of the Western scene, and the rattlesnakes was like very specific to the setting, and it gets passed down and the musical language remains even though the context isn't there. But because we have assimilated the cultural context, that's why it works.
It's like weird because like once heard, you can unhear it. kind of like the same with language. Like once you understand the meaning of a word, our brains, it's like extremely hard to break apart just the sound and the meaning. Like even if like actively trying, like you that sound, that there's so much connections going on, and I love like that you're talking about. Like it's
So much is
mesmerizing. Right?
subconscious.
Yeah,
So much
it's
it's like so subconscious. It's so cultural, which is why I think like literally anyone is like that's why I think everyone is equally valid to talk about music because I think trying to be like overly analytical and be like, well,
yeah.
this is why you like
That's
it. It's
gonna
because it did this, blah 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 music theory
Right, right.
terms, blah 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 is like a very false explanation because that doesn't really address the cultural stuff, the subconscious stuff,
Mm-hmm.
the biases, the blah blah blah. It's trying to pretend that there's a rational reason for why we
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
art, and there's not, and then there shouldn't be. Like we don't have to explain why we like something.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
And I think I agree with you that when you overanalyze, then you're kind of implying that that point of view is the only valid one.
Yeah.
And then that
And that
everybody has
shuts
to
a lot of people
appreciate it
up.
because then they're afraid to talk about it because, oh, since I don't know, then I'm probably wrong and I'm going to be embarrassed and I'm going to make a fool of myself and people are going to judge me. And you have your right to appreciate not only the music, but the media in general. You get to like what you like. So.
Absolutely. Even if you don't have the language to explain why, you don't have to. Yeah.
And exactly. And it's inherent in music. So yeah, so like music and sound goes all directions.
Mm-hmm.
Like kind of like what Xanthe was saying. Like the more people analyze it, then it's more like the more places it's like bouncing off. And that's what sound is. It's like just bouncing off everywhere. And it's like to say that, oh, just because how it bounces off the wall is the perfect way of listening to it, it's not.
Yeah, the bouncing off thing is a really great way to put it, actually, because yeah, not only just physically, like if you think of just on on a very basic level, just people listening to things on different equipment. So if you're watching the show, if you're watching a show in like a really expensive home theater where you have like surround sound system at home and you're like super fancy, but like or if you're like a lot of people watching it on your laptop or like even on a phone or like a tablet or something with maybe like cheap earbuds or like no speakers at all, like or maybe you don't even have stereo sound, you just have like whatever the sound your TV makes, just whatever's built in. You hear things so differently, and if we even assumed that everyone had the same equipment, let alone everyone's own our own hearing capacities and our own frequency ranges that are, and everyone has like different a different frequencies that are like a little bit more lost than others, just based on like hearing damage and just naturally, and not to mention like not if everyone has different cultural background, so like we don't even have the same material that we're made of, and the sound's going to be absorbed so differently, and like if to assume that everyone's listening on the same set of ears and the same speakers and with the same background and the same prior knowledge would be like, I mean, that's a problem with a lot of media, right? To assume that your audience all has, one vanilla background.
Yeah, it's like that philosophical question: is the red that I'm seeing the same red you're seeing? Type of thing. And it's
no, and so
right.
And
but that reminded me so much. That reminded me so much of like the first time I ever like saw an orchestra like live, like at a theater, because listen to stuff. You can have the best headphones or the worst headphones, and like you said, like you listen to it differently. But then when you see it live, it gives you like a completely different perspective on it. So I think that's an extremely valid point with like how we're interpreting things, because we're always going to miss something somehow based on how we listen to it, and each way of listening to it, right, gives you something that another way might not necessarily, because live you might pick up some things that you're not picking up when you're listening to on it with headphones or on your TV, like you said. But same way the other way around, maybe like you were listening to it with headphones, you pick up some different thing that you didn't pick up when you're listening to it live.
Yeah.
And
same if you're listening in the morning or if you're listening as you're falling
Mhm.
asleep, or if you're listening when
And
you're
what mood you're in, or
exactly,
Mhm.
which is
yeah.
it's all so
And
subjective.
well, yeah, and it'll also like invoke different types of, emotional
Mhm.
memories for people. Like for some
Right.
people, even if the music, oh yeah, this really good piece, but it might invoke like a negative emotion in somebody else
Right.
because they had an experience that it's like, well, it's good, but it makes me cringe, so that one's not for me. So it is very, very subjective, and it's cool that you're being like the Star Wars music guru medium to like kind of allow
He's not a
people
guru.
to express their feelings about it, without
Yeah.
judgment, and letting people say why they love it. And the more we talk about why we love Star Wars and how much we love Star Wars, I think it's
Mhm.
good for Star Wars. That's what we need out there, positive voices
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
this media that a lot of us love, when mostly the ones that get listened to a lot are like the negative points of views on it. Like, let's
Negative
just
ones
love
that
it.
try to justify it. Those are just
Mhm.
the worst. I think people like I don't know. I feel like we should normalize just like expressing our feelings about things and just not rationalizing them.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm done with that.
Because people who are, I mean, I don't mean amongst us. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
I think, yeah, this isn't a note to us. This is a note to people who are like, this is why such and such movie or track is bad. And then,
Yeah.
listing out all the reasons, which are like,
Mhm.
Mhm.
okay, well, the thing is, you're making assumptions about whether people value those reasons, those categories, even in the same ways. And
Mhm.
you want to kind of make it look like you're not just having an emotional reaction, but
Mhm.
by like giving all these justifications,
Mhm.
you're sort of like
Mhm.
obscuring just that you have an emotional reaction, and that's
Reaction to
fine.
it. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
oftentimes don't like things that I hear, and a lot of that
Mhm.
is because I just have a lot of really strong associations with music, as a lot of us do,
Mhm.
and most of the time, like I can honestly trace it to something like I'm not I'm not hearing this with the same ears that a lot of people who are listening to it are. And I can trace it back to like I have some baggage around something that's being done here.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
yeah, it just is what it is. And it's fine that I have that reaction. I don't have to like it. But
Yeah.
it's also worthless if I'm like, well, because
Yeah.
this follows in the tradition of this, and because this is like, how is someone else supposed to know all of that?
Right.
If
Right.
they don't know it, I can't
Yeah.
impose that,
Yeah.
all the reasons I don't like something onto someone else if they don't even, have that baggage to begin with.
Right. It's one of those things where like it's a additional information that can enhance something, but it doesn't detract from like the value that it's inherent on the thing as is, if it makes sense. Uh, which I think is one of the most interesting things, right, about all of the Star Wars music, and got to think, take it back and see what everyone thinks about like some of the original stuff before going into Bad Batch, which I think was like super interesting in terms of like what it did musically. No Star Wars music conversation, right, can get away without discussing John
John
Williams and
Yeah.
and all those scores, and what hasn't been said, right, about the John Williams scores before. But I'm really interested to see like what everyone's kind of opinions are about the scores as a whole, and especially like with looking at them as trilogies, right? Like, well, how the score of the original trilogy felt for everybody, the prequel trilogy, and then the sequel trilogy. Because I think, at least personally to me, and I'm interested to know what everyone thinks, the sequel trilogy was a very interesting score because I feel like, at least personally, at times it felt like John Williams, they let him do what he needed to do to kind of connect all 9 scores together. And sometimes it's like, it felt like it was pandering to the original trilogy a little much instead of just like exploring itself musically like he did like with the prequel trilogy. Because I feel like prequel trilogy's scores are amazing despite what people might think about the films and of themselves. But what does everyone think about those scores? I know it's pretty broad, but I think this conversation is working very well when talking in broad strokes here.
Who wants to start?
I don't want to go first.
Nani, you volunteered.
Fine, just because I spoke first. Okay. So I actually did grow up with the original trilogy, and I wasn't able to see them, in the theaters until they did the re-releases. Yeah, so I used to watch them on this like little tiny, like really crappy TV that we had. And it was like, recorded on VHS, and it just, and I fell in love with it from the beginning. I've been a Star Wars fan like most of my life, and I wasn't aware, obviously, back then of my connection to music. I'm not like you, Xanthe, that you picked up on that connection to music very early on. I don't think it was conscious that I noticed, the score in the movies, which now a good score is like one of my favorite things in films now. I'll really pay attention to scores. But when I actually got to the theater and, to hear it coming out of those speakers, and that's when I first noticed, like, wow, this adds so much to the experience of this film. And I was able to see all the re-releases in the theater, and I've watched them a million times, and John Williams is always good, but it brings out so much more of the film. So that was amazing. And then the prequel trilogy, I wasn't originally a big fan of. I've since learned to appreciate them a lot more. But even when I didn't like the films back when they came out all that much, I thought the score was amazing. And like you were saying, Goose, he was able to like keep the spirit of the original trilogy, but do something more with it. So it would evoke some of the, the good feelings that you had about the original trilogy, but then give you something extra. And I think the sequel trilogy suffered from that as well, because they didn't give the opportunity to make, its own score. It set it apart as itself, because they are like generational trilogies, and they should have been, even though it's the same thread, you should have your own like separate theme and the whole, and especially considering that it's supposed to be, the end of the Skywalkers, I feel like it should have been a little bit more evocative. But I mean, that's just me. Everybody's allowed to have their own opinion. Who wants to go next?
I'll jump in the fray.
Okay.
One, I think I really can't step. I'm sorry about my Dory. She's like barking. So
we love dogs here. Yeah.
I know, but I feel like I can't like separate scores from like the actual like film and TV shows. Like to me, it's like my brother would love to like just hear the scores, and I'm like, I will get bored. I'm like, well, I love them, but I love them being part of that like the connected media of like this part of the story. Like to me, the music is part of the story. My first like impact with the Star Wars films, like the original trilogy, I always tended to, and this might just be my own weird biases, that for some reason I tend to like whoever's like the bad person and like want them to like redeem themselves. But I always get attracted to those like scores, and to me those were the impactful ones, like the Empire,
Vader
like
theme,
the
and
Vader theme, and that it just somehow, it always evokes feelings like certain, it might be like a certain awe, or just this like you're facing something that you're not aware how to deal with. Then unlike the prequel, I think the impact of watching them on the theaters, because those were the first ones I was actually being able to, that change the perspective with the music, because it's like those are the ones that I remember the most. It's like might not be I don't remember watching the movie per se, maybe at the theaters, but I do remember, and it evokes those feelings of like just being there and being like feeling the music moving through you, like the score. Like that's kind of like what Goose was saying, like the orchestra, like the way music interacts with your body is different in a theater than just watching on a TV. And like what Xanthe, you were saying, like even like if you're just hearing it from your phone or from a crappy TV back in the 90s, then definitely the sound is going to be different. Than it's
Talking
not
about my TV now, it's pretty crappy.
impact you as much. So yeah, so I think that's, and but then it's been evolving now to where it's when a film or a show is so perfectly intertwined with its music and what is happening, that's when you actually see like the story being pushed forward and how it changes the whole perspective. Like music can make a scene go from like funny to like it's being something super creepy, or vice versa, being something that's like scary. And then most of like scary movies are just music. Like it's just you're always tense, but it's because of the soundtrack. It's not really what's happening. It's more like what's going on subconsciously. So I don't know. I can't separate both. So.
But I also think, oh, sorry. We're going to do a little before I forget, that it's not just, I don't think just the use of the music, it's the use of silence too. Like when you have all that music coming at you, and then when very strategically it just goes completely silent, that also evokes a lot of emotion and reactions to it. So it's both, you know, the music and the lack of the music. So I think that complements each other. And I'm sorry I interrupted you, Xanthe.
Oh, I agree with both of you. Mo, like I actually agree with, like I perceive soundtrack like scores in the same way, and to me it's very tied to the films, which is like also why on my podcast it's very tied to what, you know, so we can see how everything's interacting together. And I'm not someone who just like randomly listens to soundtracks very much. I never really was, except, you know, some outliers like Phantom Menace and whatever. But
yeah,
it's just too good.
Also think,
yep.
to that end, like the silence is also very important, and like the music isn't just. It's hard to like. It's hard for me to think about the music in a vacuum sometimes, because there are so many elements at play that like make the music what we hear and what we make of it, and like what turns out, you know, like there's many cooks in the kitchen. Obviously John Williams, the director helps, the director is the one who says what they want in the first place in certain spots, even like, you know, sometimes it's very over directed and sometimes it's very, you know, less so. But, you know, there's also like temp tracking, which I don't know. Let me know if I say anything that you're not familiar with. But like temp tracking has an impact, and also recording quality, recording technology. So I think it's interesting that Star Wars has gone through this, you know, evolution through the decades, because we're getting a glimpses of what the state of the industry is in a few different decades. And the scores to Star Wars have definitely changed. Like they're definitely different in each era, but there's a lot of, I would say there's more similarity from his last Star Wars score to John Williams' first Star Wars score. There's more similarity between those and in John Williams's like compositional style in general than there is if you consider how the rest of Hollywood has changed musically. Because musically, the Star Wars sequels are musically more like the originals than they are like Dunkirk, or like some like a contemporary, you know, a contemporary score by another composer. So I guess there's a few different like ways that we could look at that. I like all the eras of scores. Also, it's kind of hard for me to, you know, it's hard for me to pick my favorites. I think that there's also the time bias, like of the ones that I know the longest, those feeling more solidified. And so, I mean, I did predict as the sequels were coming out that like at first I was like, okay, and I kind of had a feeling the scores would grow on me, and they have. And so, like, it's hard for me to judge them in the same way. Like, I think check in on me in like 20 years to see how I feel about them. You know, because they haven't had the benefit of like popping, like me hearing them
Right.
over the decades,
Right.
you know?
Mhm.
I think something that the early scores had, especially like Empire Strikes Back, that is really special is
Mm.
really long action set pieces that feel like the visuals are almost choreographed to the music.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
But then again, like every time I say something, I can think of another time it's happened. But you know, it's just it's so hard. And I think like there's so much music to listen to nowadays that I
Mhm.
don't even know if I'm ever going to experience newer music in the same way that I already had the benefit of getting to experience old music and even old films. Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
just it's weird to me to think that like a film that comes out that I'm going to end up watching it 50 times.
Mhm.
There are so many options, Whereas
Mhm.
like if Star Wars were just coming out now, would I have watched all of them like hundreds of times? I don't know,
Right.
because there were
Yeah.
fewer options when I was a kid. So like it was
Yeah.
easy to just repeat. Gets burned in
Mhm.
my mind. The music gets
Yeah.
burned into the visuals. It all becomes really part of me. Like the asteroid field is like really burned in. Like
Mhm.
everything is like really burned in. And I just don't know I don't even know
Mhm.
like if things can be burned in the same way as easily
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
me now.
Yeah, and with
I
all the options and the streaming and all of that, it
Mhm,
really
mhm.
affects how we, consume the media. And I think we've talked about that a lot when comparing something like Netflix, which usually releases an entire
Mhm.
season, and then you binge it, and by the time you get to the end, you like forget what happened, versus what like Disney's doing, that you'll release one episode a week, and then you have time to digest it and rewatch
Right.
it, and then wait for the next episode and everything. And it definitely completely different, because old movies that I've watched a million times, sometimes I can still quote, word for word what they say. And movies that I watched like maybe last weekend on HBO Max, I can't remember
Yep.
half the plot,
Nothing.
So it
Mm-hmm.
really does affect how we consume that. And I think it does
Mhm.
happen with music too. So,
Yeah.
No, but I think it's interesting to your point too about how the music ages with you, and
mhm.
especially when contrasting it with like contemporary scores. I think that sometimes we might be kind of unfair judging other scores, because I see a lot of people. I mean, and I've not participated, but like agreed with the narrative at some point of the quote unquote Marvel problem of like not having like cohesive, or whatever you want to call it, scores or memorable scores, especially like in contrast with like films like Star Wars. And I don't know if sometimes that's like an unfair judgment that people do with contemporary movies and films of the same storytelling techniques of as Star Wars, because they're so new, they don't have that time to mature, right, and become iconic to you. And I think Star Wars, because it's been along been in the public discourse for so long, and the music has been part of it for so long, it just is ingrained and is iconic. And is it iconic just
Mm-hmm.
because the music is good, or is it just
Mhm.
iconic because it's been
It's been on our lives.
in
Yeah.
our pop culture for so
Yeah.
long that we're just like ingrained to think that it is, and Marvel isn't, just to pick on Marvel
Yeah.
here, even though I like those movies, don't
So
get me wrong. Yeah.
I'll throw a wrench into the mix here. So
Mhm,
Okay.
like I think oftentimes, there's a multi-pronged
mhm,
multiple things happening on multiple fronts.
Mhm.
mhm,
And like I guess the perception of the music like is one aspect of it, but then, things feed into other things. So like because the industry is like this and consumption habits are
mhm,
like this, and because I think it's just natural to always want to make things easier and to do things
mhm,
faster and to do things when you know
Mhm.
that people are liking them, to just do more of what works and maybe not too much more than that. Like to just efficiency is just a
Mhm.
not, a principle that I think like every organism kind
mhm,
of
Yeah.
naturally will gravitate toward. It does end up feeding back into how scores and movies are produced. So,
mhm,
um, how do I like? A lot of people do like Marvel scores,
mhm,
so it's not even true to say that like. Um, I mean, it's subjective to say that maybe Marvel scores in general are not
Mhm.
as good, but there are some objective things that we could look at. So one is like, yes, objectively, there are not as many distinct leitmotifs. Sure, we could say that. We could say harmonically, they share similar structures to hundreds of other films in the same genre. And you could say that harmonically fewer chords are used. Like there's less harmonic complexity. Now that doesn't say like, now that on its own is like not an answer, because then it's like, well, do you value harmonic complexity? Does the harmonic complexity necessarily mean better? Like complex doesn't necessarily mean better. There could be other things that are happening, but like objectively there are differences. And just whether or not those differences matter to a viewer is another story. You could also say like on a factual level, like more work is being done by like computers and stuff. Musically. Fewer live musicians are being used. And so which leads to fewer minor variations in tone and in like the timbre of different instruments. It kind of makes things like it's sort of like the Wonder Bread version of homemade bread, where like you might have an orchestra play something like a melody or whatever, a track, and then you might have the same exact composition but have the virtual instruments play it, and the virtual instruments will sound more perfect at playing it, and there might be some tiny intonation variations and discrepancies and very almost imperceptible like things with the live orchestra that don't sound quite as perfect, but they still sound kind of like they're perfect, but it's hard to describe. There's just more of a grain to it. And so when things like that are happening, that could be something subconsciously also felt, where like the melody might be just as memorable, but something about the presentation might be more polished. And in general, recorded music, not just film music, but in general, recorded music in every genre is more and more polished. You get less of that grain, and some of that is just because editing has gotten so good. You can, the grain has historically been undesirable. So you try to get things cleaner and better, but then I think like, there's a certain point where, I don't know, now things are so clean that
it sounds weird, mechanical.
That a lot of like computer-based productions and things, like they will introduce ways to make it sound grainy, or sort of like the return of like lo-fi music and stuff. Like that used to be like lo-fi music used to be have that hiss because of the natural process of like vinyl and like that just what naturally happened. And now it's like things sound so squeaky clean, and people try to inject grain back into it. And so that is definitely something going on with like modern recorded music and everything.
Right.
The musical uncanny valley.
I mean,
it makes sense because when you make something sound too perfect, you kind of lose the humanity from it, like the human effort, the emotion, and it sounds weird to us, even if we can't like put our finger on why. I think something in us is just like, but there's something wrong with it. Like it's too perfect.
It's too clean.
Yeah.
It's a trippy thing. It sounds weird to us. Maybe it sounds weird to me because I'm a music, like I play music. I know what a real instrument sounds like. Even when I'm at my best, there's variations every time.
Yeah.
And it sounds weird to me because that's what I'm used to. But I will say, like going back to how everything is cultural, everything is there are many people who have been like their introduction to music is this kind of music. So to hear the other way sounds weird. And, and also because a lot of studios will hear what's called a mock-up of a score, which is like, even if they're going to record it or like re-record it or whatever, they'll do like a computer mock-up just so that like they can hear basically what's going to go where, and it'll be like, you know, done on the computer, so it'll be like that kind of milk toast version.
Okay.
But like studios are so used to that, and because it's easy to be like, oh, let's just double the sound, let's double the amount of tracks without having to like pay double the players, you know. You
Right.
could just easily get like this big wash of
Fuller,
sound, which is like a lot of scores now are like, I mean, I don't know what some of them have. They have varying levels of complexity and like like, you know, different melodic material or whatever, but they are loud. I will say they are loud. They're loud and impactful, and they do like the boom, like the wah, like really they do that. They nail that. And so when studios hear a mock-up that has this huge wash of sound, because it's a computer, you can make it as big as you want with no consequence. Oftentimes when they sometimes when they play then the orchestra version, they're like, that's it.
Right.
Where's
What
the
happened? Like what happened to like, I don't know, like now people
The
are sort of-
loudness.
they like the perfect sounding loud thing because that has become sort of a trend. So it just naturally like, some people genuinely do prefer that. So it's just all these, it's very weird to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of like the first, because for me, it just reminds me exactly when I watch A New Hope and listen to it, like the sound mixing for that movie is like so wildly different to the Empire Strikes Back, and it's basically that, I think, right? What you're saying, like A New Hope has like that more grain into like the recording, and Empire's like that much more cleaner. At least for me, every time I hear
It's hard
those
to say
two
because there's so many like
films.
editions of them.
Yeah.
They've cleaned up various versions. I don't. Yeah.
But then it also translates to like the film itself, and I'm reminded always of Knives Out, because every time I see like interviews for Ryan Johnson, he's always talking about, because he filmed digital, that movie, but he was talking about, we want to make digital look like film, and like all the software that they have to develop to like get the flare of the light correctly, so it looks like if it was filmed on film instead of like on digital. So it's like it's happening on all fronts, right? Like, how do we make digital not look digital?
Yeah, it's all related, and I feel a lot of parallels with like practical effects versus CGI, and a lot of that exactly is like happening also in the music industry. And so it's just it's happening everywhere, and some people and I genuinely like, I almost feel, I used to feel like embarrassed saying this, but like CGI has literally never bothered me, and I can't even like really tell the difference sometimes. Like now I can sort of tell the difference just because I know it's a thing. But like growing up, I certainly didn't know the difference, and I certainly could not tell, and it wasn't jarring to me because I was used to that. And like now if I go back and like I watch like an 80s movie or like a 90s movie with puppets or something, I'm like, whoa. That is
weird.
Very different. And like if I put myself in the shoes of like seeing CGI for the first time after being used to like practical effects, and I can see how that would be jarring. But because I also am not bothered, like I wasn't bothered by any of the CGI Leia, like Tarkin, like none of it, literally none of it bothered me. None of the prequel CGI bothered me. I just didn't even notice half of it. And in that sense, I can understand, even though I don't feel the same way, I can understand why some people would not be able to tell the difference between like a real violin and a virtual violin. Even though to me, I'm like, oh my God, like it sounds so different. And like, I clearly have a preference for the live violin, but like, I can't like judge someone for not being able to tell the difference and for liking the like fake version more even.
Yeah. I mean, it really does have a lot to do with, you know, how we grew up and how we consumed the media and what we got used to and what we decided, maybe without acknowledging it, because maybe it's something that we decided, you know, when we were kids. We didn't actively choose to like it that way, but it's just like, oh, this is what I'm used to, and this is how it's supposed to be like, because this is what I've been watching for years. And then seeing it done a different way, it's like, that's not necessarily the right way.
which I think is one of the cool things now with the Mandalorian soundtrack that Ludwig Göransson has done. Like he still has like all the orchestral, like traditional composing, right? But he also like puts in like electronic things into it. So like it's starting to marry the digital and the traditional, to for lack of a better word, composing into like something that's new but still feels Star Wars. So like I don't know, I really appreciate like what is being done sonically in that sense, talking about, you know, the marriage between like the digital and the analog, so to speak.
So what do we want to talk next? We've been going for a while, guys.
Well, I think the elephant in the room is the Bad Batch, right? We have to like talk with what's happened there. I think obviously I want to hear everyone's thoughts now that we've let the show sit for a week after the final episode came out. It's like how does the show, how has it, you know, how do we feel about it now that the season's over, now that we have expectations for season 2, kind of before getting into the music of it, right? What are our final impressions now of the Bad Batch as a season?
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the Bad Batch.
Yes.
I'm someone who likes to marinate. Like I think I never have like fully formed opinions ever. I think they're always kind of in progress.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll see how I
Voting.
feel about it in like a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, things are always, it's a little bit too soon for me to like do a full on retrospective of it or
Yeah.
whatnot. But I think I enjoyed it, and I also think it wasn't like groundbreaking to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was good, it was safe, and
Yeah.
It's a good word.
That's a good. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll see.
Gomo.
Oh, well, to me, it just feels like a eulogy, like kind of like closing of chapters. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we've all come to love, and I mean, not all. I mean, people have watched Clone Wars and like the whole Rebels and this whole saga. It's almost like wrapping up another loophole that was left open between like the prequels and the sequels, and so I like where they're going. I can't say I did enjoy a lot the visuals. Like I was just mesmerized every time I like look at the backgrounds with no actions. For some reason they have like great still shots of like landscapes, and how everything, it's just like heading towards like seeing the development of Omega. I think I'm excited for that. I can't. Yeah.
What about you?
I mean, it's I mean, I did like Bad Batch. I don't want to say like I didn't like it. I did enjoy it, but I think safe is like a perfect word to describe the show, because I mean, even when they announced it, like I wasn't thrilled about the concept, because like it's okay, so it's the Clone Wars 7.5. It's the same characters that we've already seen the same, doing the same things in the same era of Star Wars that we kind of always you know, it's like beating everyone over the head with that era, which is like, don't get me wrong, I love it going into what happens between 3 and 4, but we've done it so much that it's kind of like, okay, can we just do something different? But despite that handicap that I had going into the show, I still think that it was particularly strong. It like dragged at some points, but overall, like I think, especially like towards the end with everything that happened with Camino, it was like you said, Mo, it's like a coda, right? It's like this is like the it's closing the book on that chapter. So
the end of the Clone Wars.
So like I'm definitely excited to see what happens now in season 2. And it's like okay, what happens now? What are the consequences of like the end of the Clone Wars? I just am concerned that the show itself will become kind of derivative of itself, because it's set in a timeline that we've seen so much. It's like, will it just end up doing things we already know happen in an era that we already know the end
How
point
everything
to.
ends up. Yeah.
Right. So like that's kind of my concern. However, kind of like bringing it back to like music and whatnot. I think in terms of what it did musically, and maybe I'm just misremembering the music in Clone Wars and Rebels, but I feel that the music for Bad Batch was the most daring music that like all the animated Star Wars things have done, because I feel like it didn't need to be beholden to like the John Williams style of like doing music, and I just felt like it just did what it needed to do for the story. And obviously one of the first things that comes to mind is what you were mentioning, Xanthe, about Cat Bane and the Western stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah.
we wouldn't see that in John Williams movie. I don't think like rattlesnakes. It's like it would have been some variation in an orchestral way, but here to do like that spaghetti Western type sound, the Clint Eastwood thing, in such a distinct and aggressive way, I really appreciate it, because like it kind of makes you think about the music. Because sometimes the music might be good, but it just stays at the background. And I think I don't know if it was Kevin Kiner or the Kiner brothers. I'm frankly confused about the distinction of like who was doing the composing there. But I felt like they took some really fun risks to make the music like part of the narrative, because I feel like people are talking about the Bad Batch music more so than like music has been discussed in previous animated things. I don't know if you disagree or agree with that.
Discussion, I think you're probably right. Although I didn't watch all the Clone Wars. I mean, I've seen all the Clone Wars, but as it was coming like out, I didn't see it like weekly as it was coming out. So I don't know if like weekly people were like on Twitter talking about it.
Yeah.
But I did notice a fair bit of conversation about like the music and sound of the Bad Batch, and so having getting the conversation started was really cool to see people pick up on it.
Yeah, I thought there was something, because I was also, when they announced Bad Batch, like, yeah, I don't care that much. It's definitely not groundbreaking because it's basically another season of Clone Wars, just, from the perspective of just, the batch. But I mean, to see the extent of how the animation has become so insane, especially when you compare it to when the Bad Batch began and, the original movie and the first seasons. And you can see how amazing they can make this type of animation look. And I don't think I really noticed much of the score, in the previous shows, except for, in Rebels and stuff, when they would bring in, the John Williams stuff, when Darth Vader shows up, or, when Darth Maul and all these things. But the Batch had a very evocative, I think, score, because it did bring a lot of emotions. Like they kind of made the score a part of the story. Not just, specific to characters like with Cat Bane, which I thought was fantastic, but, when with that whole episode in Camino, when, they're underwater and everything sounds like really mournful, and, it's like that last gasp of, the Clone Wars era. And I thought they did really well kind of adding on some of the John Williams stuff, in like small pieces to make you, have your memory triggered by other Star Wars stuff in good moments, and then, add your own thing. And I thought the actual Bad Batch theme is really good. And they use it on purpose in really, wonderful ways, like when they fight together again for the first time. And there was an episode where they use a little bit of like the Mando theme. And I thought there was like a lot of really cool.
What was the episode with the Mando theme?
It was the Ryloth at the end.
Okay.
I have to really
interesting. I've been doing like I was doing like weekly live streams, doing the music commentary with a couple of my friends, and we did notice in that episode. Well, we did notice that something at the end reminded us of the Mando theme. It was the rhythm, like the speed that was happening. It was like this heartbeat thing. Do.
Yeah, and I thought it was Mando.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So as soon as I thought I saw it, and I watch all these things with my husband, who's a very big Star Wars fan too, and we were both watching it, and we kind of both picked up on it, and we're like, does that sound like Mando?
Yeah.
So
it did sound like Mando. I don't know if it was, but it definitely was something where I was like, That's
Okay. Well, I'm really glad somebody agrees with me.
Yeah, I'll have to re-listen to it because I did not pick that up. So now I need
the
to
very
go
end of
back.
the episode.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, now I have something to do for the afternoon.
Yeah.
Like,
But I mean,
That's a good example of like something that a lot of that people, there's not a confirmed connection. It's something that people
But you can kind of
may have
pick
picked
it up.
on. And
Mhm.
then it's also sometimes a lot of the time we make connections between things that are just natural byproducts, common
Mhm.
natural byproducts of music. And so it's easy to follow breadcrumbs to a point where it's
Mhm.
like a little bit breadcrumby, but it's still like definitely and unless something is confirmed or denied, like that is always
Right.
like a special
Mhm.
connection that someone can keep in their heart as long
Mhm.
as, you know, we're not saying it's fact.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, that is something where I couldn't tell like if it was an intentional recall or if it's just like
Right.
that's
Mhm.
not like an uncommon beat. Like it could just be like the
Right.
beat that he used.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it could be a coincidence, but yeah, I think
Yeah.
the way that I think about it is like if something like that triggers a connection in my mind, then I like stand by and see if it happens like
Again, yeah.
2 or 3
Again.
more times. Because then
Okay.
like if it's when it's a pattern,
Mhm.
then it makes me want to investigate it even more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So
It's
my mind
it's
is
like in that
primed to hear that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's like in that
Because
episode
you're
of
right.
The
It could have been on
Mandalorian, right?
purpose, but it could have been not on purpose what they did, but it
Mhm.
really sounds like it. So I don't know. I hope it was purposeful. Because
Throughout
then
the
it's
season,
like,
there were a few times where I'd hear like sort of a melody, and I'd be like, I can't tell if it's like just a melody for this scene or if it's going to come back
okay.
again.
Mhm.
And sometimes like the melody would come back again, and you know there were a couple times where I'd predict like, okay, this thing that we heard, I think it's going to keep coming back, and I think it's going to mean this. And a few times I was
Okay.
definitely right, but like
Mhm.
but sometimes I was definitely like it never came back again, so it was just a one-off
Okay.
thing.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But yeah, some of them were like that's how I picked up on Rampart's theme, and that's how like I think in episode 3 is when I like predicted Crosshair's music,
Mhm.
and
Okay.
like a few other things where it's like if it's one time, you don't know, it might be a mistake. If it's 2 times,
Yeah.
it's coincidence. It's 3
Mhm.
times,
It's
I
intentional.
pattern. I
Pattern.
think we might have a motif on our hands.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It's a good way to look at find
Yeah.
the patterns. Because there's a lot of like red herrings. Like
Mhm.
you also
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
run into something that's similar, but it's
Like
not.
Omega being force sensitive. I think that was a red herring that they threw out like at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
I thought the
Uh,
chip thing. I thought
Mm.
the chip thing was a red herring too, which it kind of wasn't a red herring at first. But I maintain that the chip event was a red herring, sort of
Mhm.
like.
Mhm.
But that's just my personal take. That's my personal interpretation of Crosshair.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things though about like media, and like you said, it's, until it's, and even if it's confirmed right by creators, it's like I mean, it's not up to like us to like leave a theory or a emotion of how we interpret something just because it's not the thing. I mean, because that's art, right? You interpret it however you want. And if it makes sense to like some people say, oh, it's my head canon, and I think that's totally fine. If it makes more sense to anyone in some way and in an interpretation, then that's just as valid, I think, because it gives something a little extra, even if it's not what is meant by the creators or the writers. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
a
Also,
different layer.
Also, just like the idea of there being like a singular intent, like a clear intent from creators is like very misrepresentative of the creative process. And I say that like as a
Yeah.
creative person who makes stuff. And sometimes I do things knowing that like, yeah, there are a few ideas I have in mind behind this, but like it's so rare that I'm like, this is the master plan and this is exactly the one intent of this thing. And it is definitely the answer. Like someone has to unlock this key. And like, because sometimes people bring things up that I'm like, I didn't necessarily intend, but I'm like,
Sure.
yeah, because yeah, subconsciously I think that was also working.
Mhm.
Like there's
Mm-hmm.
just it's just
There's so
things
much.
happen for so many reasons, and like this is
Right.
why, like, I don't know if you've heard of like the concept of death of the author,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
yeah, so like I tend to consume Star Wars media that way, which is why like I don't like really pay attention too much to Star Wars news
Mm-hmm.
and things, because on a certain level, like I don't, like, this is gonna sound bad, but sometimes I don't care what they intended, because
Right.
Right. Mhm.
as fans, like, are we supposed to just keep up with all the creators and just to know exactly what they meant? Because
Right.
this gets into like just how we interact with each other, like interpersonally. Like, just
Mm-hmm.
because
Right.
someone says something and they're like, "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," that doesn't mean that like
Right.
your interpretation of what they said is wrong. Because
Mhm.
intent, I think, is like a weapon that's thrown around too much that like also is the end of the
Mhm.
conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
the thing is, like, with the things that we do and the things that we make and the things that we say, regardless of our intent,
Mm-hmm.
like there are ripples that we can't anticipate because of like what Mo said with like the different walls the things are bouncing
Right.
off of. So like I
Right.
almost don't care totally about creator intent, because I know they have subconscious things that are working through them.
Mhm.
Right.
They have subconscious biases. They have subconscious, stuff that, and they have things that they weren't aware of. And
Yeah.
they also, like, as fans, like, we should have the freedom to have reactions to the
Mhm.
work without like needing to understand everything that they intended. And also, as creators, they deserve to have their work looked at critically, analytically, theoretically,
Right.
without them having to explain themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I think you're absolutely right, especially in terms of like, and I mean, it must happen with other fandoms. I'm just like not engaged with the discourse of other fandoms, but specifically with Star Wars fandom, I think a lot of discourse in terms of talking about a movie or a TV show or whatever is too focused on canon, right? It's like, oh, what does this mean for the storytelling in terms of like what's happening, how everything connects, instead of just looking at it like what does it mean for itself and for the characters and what's the point of the story, instead of like how does it tie to something else. And I think a lot of people are just bogged down too much by canon and like creator intent instead of just like discussing what it means
Yeah,
to
I don't
yourself in terms of
care
like
about the
story.
creator intent. And also, if you
Mhm.
want to talk about canon, like, let's talk about the actual universe. What people are
Mhm.
actually
Yeah.
talking about with that is like they're talking about the meta. Like, they're
Mhm.
not even
Mhm. Mhm.
talking about like they're ta- it's so frustrating. And
Mhm.
It is.
yeah, it's also why, like, just because we know what's going to happen, like, just because we know in our hearts like what the main points, like, I bet if you asked like three different people what vaguely what the Star Wars story is,
Mhm.
I bet people would have like different points of focus
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
and different things that, and like different interpretations of like even who won certain
Mhm.
things, and like who,
Mhm.
it's sort of like how wars in history, like, history is told from
Mhm.
the particular, one
Right.
side,
Yeah.
the winner's side and whatever. And I think that describes a lot of Star Wars too, which is like,
Mhm.
um, I don't know. It would be. I like to talk about Star Wars as if I'm like living in as if
Mhm.
I'm living in that
Mhm.
galaxy, not living in the
Mhm.
galaxy where I'm like, this director is retconning the other director. Like,
Mhm.
who
Right.
cares? Like,
Like
let's talk
what?
about what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
They're
I
more
mean, as Obi-Wan always likes to say, from a certain point of view, because even the story,
The catch-all.
even the story that we already get, we see the point of view of the protagonists. So,
Mhm.
from other characters' points of view, they weren't the bad guys, they were the good guys. So you can't just assume that the end is
Mhm.
how we get to perceive it, because it's seen from the lens of those like main characters. So you have the possibility that events weren't done that way, because even history can be reinterpreted depending on
Mhm.
who's writing
Mhm.
the story. And
Ron discourse
as
bothers me so much. Let me just say, because
that
people
people get
like,
so stuck on that.
obviously there's like, I mean, if you read the novels, you might be
Mhm.
Mhm,
surprised by how Thrawn is in Rebels,
Mhm.
mhm,
and vice versa. And
mhm,
I, I, I find the framing so interesting and so interesting in a way that I don't like.
Right,
Yeah.
It's
right,
like,
right.
are you going to
Mhm.
make Thrawn good or bad? Like, is Thrawn a villain or not? And it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. On one side, it's like Thrawn is a villain, and like the books try to make him like sympathetic and like
Mhm.
whatever. And on the other side, it's like the shows make him into a villain, but like we stand Thrawn, and like I love the Thrawn
Mhm.
books. Okay, I love
Mhm.
them. Um, and I prefer the portrayal of Thrawn in the books than in the show. But
Mhm.
I don't think I don't think they're unlike rectifiable. I think it's like
Yeah.
one is very clearly like how Thrawn is through the eyes of like the rebellion. That's the lens of
Mhm.
rebels.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's how they perceive him. They don't know all the other stuff that's going on underneath.
Right.
And it's not
Right.
even that he's not a villain or not. Like, first of all, the concept of villains, I just don't subscribe to. I don't even
Yeah.
understand. Like, I cannot tell the difference. But if it comes down to it, I can't really tell the difference between like, why is the Bad Batch morally so much better than Crosshair? They both
Mhm. Mhm.
kill
Mhm.
people for orders. Like, I don't know. Like, really, there's not like a hard line
Yeah.
Right.
between them.
Yeah.
And
And now they're basically mercenaries, doing jobs for money. So does that make them morally better that they do it for money, but Crosshair works for the Empire and the Empire's bad, so Crosshair's a bad guy? Like,
yeah, I
yeah.
think just
Yeah.
objective terms is just makes things very confusing because people have different
Mhm.
interpretations of what bad means and what evil
Mhm.
means and what this means. So
Mhm.
half the time people aren't even talking about the same thing. So like if you talk about it, I always like to boil things down to what are the actual basics of objectively what is happening. Sort of like with
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
music. Our opinions are our own thing, but objectively we
Mhm.
can look at what is actually different. So objectively we could look at like what who is harming who or like who is being
Mhm.
hurt or like
Mhm.
who is being and so when it comes to Thrawn, sorry, this is a little bit of a tangent, probably should
No,
when
it's
it comes
fine.
to
We
Thrawn
love
Oh,
it's
this is
these.
like
fantastic.
We
when it comes
love
to
these.
okay, when it comes to Thrawn it's like objectively he is doing things for the Empire. Objectively
Mhm.
he is working against the rebellion.
Mhm.
Objectively he is like on this side. He's also a sensitive person that cares about his people and cares deeply about art
Mhm.
and has like a really strong and doesn't like backstab the people members of his crew, and he's like
Mhm.
in the context of like the Chiss and like just any ship that he's like commandeering, basically like
Mhm.
he's pretty like principled in terms of the hierarchy, and he's
Mhm.
is willing to listen to people who are below him, and all these good things are true, or all
Mhm.
these things are true about him. He also is killing rebels, so
Mhm.
Yeah.
it's not that he's evil,
Yeah.
but
Well, he's
yeah,
doing his
I
job.
love Thrawn,
He's doing his
but
job.
he
Yeah.
also is, but I also choose to like side with the rebellion. So that
Mhm.
is,
Mhm.
you know, yeah, it's not that he's
Yeah.
evil, but he's doing something that I don't like.
Right.
I mean, but who knows? I mean, maybe after the Purgo space whales took Ezra and
Mm.
Thrawn,
Yeah, I
maybe
mean,
Thrawn now they're besties, and he comes back to join the new Republic, maybe like in the Ahsoka
Yeah,
show or whatever.
but it's not like people. Yeah, but it's not like he's redeemed. He
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
he's just not like he's never been evil to begin with. No
Right.
one really
Yeah.
has. They're all just even like Arinda Price or like all these so many
Mhm.
of the like most of the Empire, I'd say,
Mhm.
other than
Yeah.
like Palpatine and like all of them are kind of trying to move forward in their own careers and
Right.
and like
Right.
seeing it
Trying
in
to pay
those
the bills.
terms, and also just like not be on the side that's like in this culture of intimidation. It's also kind of
Mhm.
unsafe to be a rebel, like so
Mhm.
there's just like all these reasons that people
Mhm.
might
Mhm.
be on the side. It's like in the Wizard of Oz when the witch is finally killed, like
Yeah.
her lackeys immediately are like, thank God the witch is dead.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yep.
It's like
The
no
Empire
loyalty.
is like, yeah, the sides and everything. It's all more
Yeah.
complicated than we paint it
It's
sometimes.
because So there's
I think Star Wars is trying to do that actively now, because I mean, obviously when the originals came out, I think it was supposed to be very black and white. It was like Rebels good, Empire bad. But I think now with like Rogue One and some of the other stories, Alphabet Squadron, I think was a good trilogy of books for that. Kind of show the nuance in it and just say it's like some people, you know, they just happen to be working for the Empire because that's the life that they know, and the Empire has been good for them because they're just trying to pay the bills. So it's kind of interesting that way to kind of see that it's not so clear cut sometimes. And for the Empire, right, the rebels are terrorists; they're killing a bunch of people. All the millions of people that died on the Death Star.
all the homeless family, right? Like after the Death Star, like millions. Guys, like
I think what's interesting is like ideologically, I think like the Empire is bad, but that's as a whole, which doesn't imply that every single member is a villain.
Right.
Like I think the concept of the Empire is not good. It's or, you know, especially something like Palpatine's Empire. Like that is definitely not great. But that's not the same thing as like saying that every stormtrooper has the same like intentions and everything.
Yeah.
Which Finn is the perfect example for, right? It's just like some guy who didn't know any other life, and it's like, oh wait, this is not cool.
Yeah, they're taking as babies too.
Yeah, they're taking as babies too.
well, because, and then you run into, you know, at what moment are they free to make a choice to even like break away from the Empire?
Right. And that's when it becomes like, okay, now we see why the Empire is evil, because they don't want you to have the choice. You have to conform. And that's when like the institution itself is the thing that like is what we're fighting against instead of the individuals within it.
Yeah. Agreed.
By like when they want, you know, Project War Mantle, when they want to, you know, move away from the clones and go toward people, storm for, you know, their troopers. You know, it's also to get that buy-in, I think, of people who feel loyal. Like, you know, it's like you're getting people not only to fight for you, but because we tend to have a bias toward what we're doing, it makes people believe in the Empire more. You know, like there are like all these, there's like, you know, research showing that like if you die or if your family like dies, like not like when it comes to like being part of the military or something, if you
the
believe
benefits
that you're fighting for a cause, then the loss feels to people like it's noble, even though that's like a completely fictional thing that we're making up. Like we can choose to think it's noble death or not, or like for a cause, but like because it would really destroy like our perception of these deaths if we thought that we were not fighting for a noble cause. So like we kind of, if people in our family are joining the military, we kind of, it's in our best interest to feel like it's for a noble cause, or else we'll feel like trash if they die. So,
but that's the story we make ourselves.
Exactly.
Right.
Which is like why it's so smart from the Empire's perspective that they want to move toward enlisting people, because then they have all these people who are not only fighting for them, but then this culture of like, yeah, we want to fight, and yeah, we believe in it, and so it,
I mean, that feels so meta. Everything you're saying is just like reminding me of everything that's going on right now with
that's why I love Star Wars
with Afghanistan and everything. So I'm like, oh, Star Wars got real.
Life.
Yeah,
it does.
But that's the beauty of it. Like you get a story that reflects, and then you mirror. You can look at because it's so hard to tell somebody, or even to yourself, like you're doing this wrong. But if you see a story, oh wait, I might be doing something wrong, or I'm approaching something different, then that's your own conclusion. You're not being forced into that conclusion. You're acquiring it, which is a totally different process.
It gives you a new perspective.
In the neutral ground of media is sort of like a way that we can actually talk to each other about things like Afghanistan and things like other things that are happening, because we have this like shared allegory that we're working from, that, you know, depending on the time we're in, there might be different specific, you know, things to extrapolate from that example, but like you can take a step back and be like, do we actually think this is all like, is this actually how we feel about this? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I touched the cord and I was like, oh no.
Like, oh no.
Is this actually how we feel about this issue? Like, let's take a step back and like, if you really think things are good and good and evil and really like that, then how would we describe this other thing that's happening? Yeah. So I think it's like media is a good place to like evolve our personal journeys on like real life.
Right.
Oh,
Which is kind of the frustrating thing sometimes in the narrative of fandom, sometimes when they get quote unquote upset that Star Wars is quote unquote political. It's like, I mean, it always has been, and all media is, because it's always infused by the perceptions and experiences of the people creating it. And that will always inherently make a statement about something, conscious or not, because the creator might not. And I'm not talking about Star Wars right now, I'm just talking in general, right? A creator might not want to necessarily infuse something with a political statement or a position about a certain topic, but it will be there because a person made it, and that person has those experiences, and it will always be infused by it. But beyond that, we're interpreting it, and when you interpret, you also infuse it with your own perspectives and opinions. So when people are saying like, "Oh, it got political," they're infusing their politics into it automatically. So they're making it
Nothing
political
is
too.
neutral. This is like such like, as someone who like went to art school, and there's like, I'm just gonna say it, like in art school, like all the people that think art should be neutral, and like music, as a composer, like you should just compose things that are not like political, whatever. Like it's always the freaking it's always like the straight white boys that are saying that, and that are always just like, this art, it's gimmicky because it latches onto this thing. Like I don't do stuff that's like identity related, and it's like,
But by doing that, you are, right?
it's like I don't think I am either. I'm doing things from my lens, and nothing's neutral unless you actually have made some cardboard cutout of what the neutral perspective is, like, which is saying a lot, that you would have to really be honest with yourself about what you think the neutral wall is, to go back to Mo's analogy. Like you would have to really go back to like, what is the paint color, what is their wallpaper, like is there a texture, is there, what material is it, like how big is it, like there are all these things. And the thing is, everything in this world is like interdependent, it's interdependent.
I mean, but
and
even making that neutral statement is a position
Making a statement
on everything else.
Absolutely.
So it's still a statement and taking a position, because you're basically taking the anti to all of those
meta
things.
I mean,
right?
The levels of
Well, and I mean, isn't it the point of art to make us feel something and think about something and reevaluate and everything? And if you just straight up make it neutral, what's the point?
totally fine for perception of art to be different depending on the generation, and depending on like the era that we're in, and the needs and the sensitivities of people of that era, and not like, I think nothing is static and nothing's neutral.
There's no
And we don't have to agree either.
Yeah.
We just,
well, I mean,
we don't
beauty
have
is
to
in the eye of
agree.
the beholder. Like, you might
Disagreeing on things helps reveal like, oh, it turns out we have this different type of lens, and then it helps us learn more about each other through what we disagree.
Right.
Well, that's why I loved Tech's comment at the last episode of Bad Batch, when he's defending Crosshair to Wrecker, and he said, and all of a sudden Wrecker's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were on his side," and Tech is just like, "Just because I understand him doesn't mean that I agree with him."
Agree.
And I think that's what we.
Line of the yeah.
That's what we need to do with everything. We have to understand things, even if we don't agree with it and don't support it. But like, understanding is not it's a prerequisite to like having a position on things, and not necessarily in favor or against, but it's paramount, right? To like understand the things that we're either taking a position for or against, be it like in politics and reality, or with like the media that we're choosing to interact with, because we don't have to engage with media, but the minute that we choose to engage with it, we are subconsciously taking a stance from our points of view. So it's paramount that we un- understand it, whether by like our interpretations of it and understand why we interpret it the way that we do, or like in understanding the context around it and other people's points of view for it.
Yep, everything.
And being able to actually respect people for having their own opinions and not just like put them down because they think a certain way.
Unless they're abhorrent
Well, yes.
opinions, right? There's just positions that just are wrong.
Well, anyway, I think we've been talking for a while, everybody. So if anybody has any final thoughts or some other theme that they want to bring up before we're done.
I think I just wanted to ask Xanthe and everybody as a closing thought, moving forward. I mean, this is a Star Wars podcast, so let's talk specifically about Star Wars. Moving forward with Star Wars, what expectations do we want to see, like with the storytelling that's going to happen? It could be like, open-ended question, right? It could be just with the storytelling or with the music composition, right? To keep it within the theme of of today's episode. So what do we want to see from Star Wars moving forward, musically and storytelling-wise? Start with you, Nanny.
Of course, always start with me.
Yes.
I'm really very much looking forward to how they're going to interpret Thrawn in live action media. I am looking forward also to see how they because I wasn't a big fan of how Ahsoka was portrayed in Mandalorian, so I kind of want to see more of the animated version of Ahsoka, like that spirit of that character more in the show. So I'm looking forward to that. Obviously looking forward to the Obi-Wan show, and Obi-Wan being one of my favorite characters. I'm really, really looking forward to Visions, which comes out soon. I think it looks amazing. I hope that they continue to do musically what they did with the Bad Batch, which is, take some risks and adding some, random, sounds and musics that are important to specific characters, kind of mixing, what's already been done with the music so that we continue to feel that things are essentially Star Wars. Because there is something about when you add different senses of the music that ties everything together, it makes you think, oh yeah, this is Star Wars. This is Star Wars from when I was 10, even if it's like not beating you over the head with it, like just the subtle additions of the music there. But I think that Star Wars is moving in a pretty good direction, and we're going to get a lot of content next year. I'm definitely looking forward to the Book of Boba as well, and third season of Mandalorian. So there's a lot to look forward to. So.
Xanthe, what about you?
Anne and me is like very excited about all the new stuff that's happening. I mean, I'm really getting into the books lately. Like that's where I feel like I'm most interested in right now. I actually think I wouldn't mind if Star Wars slowed its roll a little bit.
And you don't get hit over the head with it so much. Yeah.
Yeah, because I love Star Wars when it's feels really crafted. Like not like part of a big series. I like when it feels very personal, and I'm willing to wait double time for that.
I agree with you.
And I think musically, I would like to see more live instruments being used. Bad Batch, to me, from my perspective, felt very computery.
Yeah.
And I know that they're working on like a lot of that is
fast productions
because they're working on fast production times and all this others like deadlines and everything. But like,
and the pandemic and everything.
How I feel, but how I feel is like, I would like Star Wars as a brand or whatever to be a leader in the industry and not like be so fast.
Try to rush it.
Everything like take your time, and I would like them to take chances on newer creators in all the everything musically too. And I think like getting kind of I think Star Wars is at its best when it's like weird and crafted and really creative and cool, and not just like let's fill in all of the gaps and tell all the stories and do all the hit all the right things and like make sure we throw in characters that are
recognizable,
check off all the boxes of like our diversity. Like I would rather that not be the case. I would rather them take the time to like develop really deep stories. And so, yeah, I'm not saying that they like definitely haven't done that, but given that like fans are so used to like there being an announcement of like a new thing all the time, and like I can see how like there is a lot of fan pressure to like do new stuff and like promote this more and like
and then
give
we
us
fall
more
into that trap.
reveal. Yeah, and I kind of want to I kind of want to like slow down, even if fans are kind of in agony. Like don't give us our candy all the time. Like I you know, I love like Bad Batch was fun, like whatever.
Yeah.
But nothing beats waiting 10 years for a new movie, and then that is like the biggest event of the year, and that is just like an indescribable, like otherworldly, like that is such a big thing. Like I would love that. It's hard to imagine that happening again.
Yeah.
Just because there's so much like
fast, instant, like
there's so much rush to get like so much media out all the time. But I think, and I think we talked about this last time about how Star Wars does thrive on, you know, you get this one trilogy, you have to wait 10 years.
Star Wars does better when there's less Star Wars.
Yeah, and then you sit in the theater for the first time and you see the opening lines and the crawl, and then you're just like,
You get the boost
yes.
And then when we have years of just like being like, oh my God, that opened, like there's so many questions now and we don't have the immediate answer.
What's happening?
And like now it's like, oh, we'll fill in all of the gaps, like pour in all, like fill in every single gap. And I love when there's just like I love when there's stuff I don't know. Like I'm someone who I don't even watch trailers. I
don't either. I hate watching trailers because one,
I don't like having preconceived notions, and I don't.
Yeah, and they have like their own theme. So sometimes the theme of the trailer and what you think the movie's going to be about has nothing to do with what the film ends up being, because they're just dragging people in. So I don't like that. And I don't like going in with like a preconceived notion of what I'm going to watch.
I don't like my emotions already being like, because even if I try to be so neutral, if I watch a trailer or if I hear like some sort of a sneak peek, I won't be able to help it. I'll kind of go in being like, I don't really feel, I feel a little bit worried about this thing that I saw. Like, I want to protect myself from that as much as possible. And so that's my take.
I hate watching them, but I agree with you on the whole that we need like new creators with new perspectives, which is one of the reasons that I am looking forward to Visions, because we're looking at Star Wars from like Japanese anime creators. And I think we need more of that. Like we need more representation, not only in the actors, but in, you know, the crews, the directors, and because it's a whole different perspective. And we don't know other people's truths. And the more that you inject, you know, variety, you're going to get better, more real human stories. So
I think also letting creators like be creative rather than being like, you have to hit all these points.
Which is, I think, what's good about the High Republic, because it's in an era that nobody knows. They're more free to create whatever they want. I feel like they get so stuck.
No with that.
Oh, because you know, eventually when they end up.
Well, I feel like the High Republic, I'm definitely, I'm not done with Wave 2, but, you know, I'm keeping up with everything as, you know, as much as possible.
As much as possible.
I have really liked a couple of the High Republic books so far, especially the Justina Ireland one.
Oh, yeah, I'm halfway through that one right now.
And I think High Republic is sort of doing. I hope High Republic gets way more creative, because I think High Republic is like awesome that it's in a new era, but I think also of the fact that like all of the individual creators, they have to hit like certain things
the points.
to make sure that they all are with each other. And I think I would have loved to see High Republic with just like one book at a time, not like this big release where they're all working on the same thing together and they're making sure that they all have the right crossover and like none of the plot points stick out. I think I would have loved to see like, then the next book has to like, even if it takes place at the same time, like it would be cool if each creator had the freedom to like go really weird, but like they can't. They have to. They know that like how it's going to play out for the next whatever, and that's
because
fine.
It has
I'm
to match with the other one.
Yeah, but I just
want them to have more creative freedom.
Yeah, because I think there's something like really special when a creator is able to just like really take risks. Like each individual author is able to like really be weird and do whatever. You know, like Timothy Zahn creating Thrawn, like it was a full open. Like he could do whatever, like, and I think the way that world was really built up. Like, I think it really shows. And I think if someone else were now to continue Thrawn, I think they could work off of what he already established.
Right.
But it would have been different if like Thrawn was also coming out at the same time as like another tie-in novel at the same period, and then they had to make sure that the characters ended up in a certain place at the same time, and then they had to make sure that not too much, like you have to make sure to kill off this character, you have to make sure this one hits this planet,
Right.
make sure this one has, this is all of their character descriptions, like this is the art, we already have the art, like
which is why the first Thrawn canon, oh my god, there's 3 Thrawn trilogies. The second trilogy, which is the first canon trilogy, is not as good as like the new books, I feel, because I feel like
you mean
exactly what you said.
You mean Heir to the Empire?
No, the Thrawn Allegiance, Alliance, and Treason.
I think that's the best.
I interesting, because I feel that trilogy of books, it ran, especially Treason in particular. I did not enjoy that one because it felt like it was doing what you're saying. It had to hit those story beats of connecting with rebels so much that it kind of felt bogged down to me anyway. And that's why I like the new Thrawn books. It's like it's in the unknown regions and doesn't have to tie with anything.
You mean the like ascendancy?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I like that too. I thought you meant you were comparing it to expanded universe Thrawn.
Oh no, well that's
because I think
that's something else.
I think that's like the worst of the. I mean, I like it, and I understand why it's like cult status, but I think those stories are like I think the expanded universe is like very overrated in some instances, and I say that as someone who grew up reading those books. I think it's overrated because of the way that Luke and Leia and Han still have to be preserved in those. Right. And so I feel like Luke, Leia, and Han in those stories are just like
they don't have a minute
to grow. I mean, they kind of grow a little bit, but it's like I don't know, like
they can't
wouldn't have
relax.
gotten Last Jedi version of Luke, put it that way. Like because Luke still has to be like a hero and whatever. But I think the first Thrawn canon book is the best. And I really like Chaos Rising as well. And I love
Congratulations.
Totally new. Yeah.
But Mo, what about you? What are your thoughts for Star Wars moving forward, both storytelling and musically?
Honestly, I think you've all hit perfect points, like more creativity, more like just be weird with it. Just go like I think Star Wars can benefit from actually that. Just let the creators just do what they want. You have the fan base. Like even if you have like a couple they're gonna like, oh, there's not Star Wars, most people are still gonna watch it. Like you actually have the best fan base to just go crazy with it. But one of the stories I'm really, really looking forward to, it's the on Visions, which is the one with the robot, the
Astro Boy,
the Astro Boy, because we're finally getting to the point where that's gonna be our next big hurdle. Like, how as a society are we gonna be okay with AI being as conscious as we are? And they're gonna be I can definitely see the next few battles is gonna be like, well, is the AI conscious? Did we just create them? Are they? And they're eventually they are living beings. They are, if they can conscious and process and be aware of everything. Who are we to tell them they're not? So to have a force sensitive robot, I'm really excited for that story. Like, just getting that craziness and openness out there.
Well, and that is why I'm so excited about Visions, because you're not only getting a different perspective, but they weren't strangled by the fact that they had to hit points. Like, they got the liberty to do whatever story they wanted, and the stories don't have to match, and nobody cares, and they're all done in completely different art styles. So I really want it to be successful so that we can continue to get stories like these done in Star Wars. So everybody out there that wasn't into Visions, just watch it.
But what I don't want is, like, if Vision is successful, and then they take that success and they're like, now we're gonna like pump out the style of Japanese anime. Like, a lot of that. Like, I hope. So like,
Yeah.
to commercialize,
It's a thin.
like over commercialize
Yeah.
cool thing. Like I think
the
Yeah.
Disney
I think there
treatment.
needs to be ways to keep it special. Like I would
Disney.
love
Yeah.
maybe every year or every 2 years if there's like a new batch of Vision stories.
Mhm.
Right. Like if it's
That would
good,
be
yeah,
cool.
you keep it silent for a few years and then use different
And keep it
creators like
yeah,
every few
keep
years.
it being new. Like don't
Yeah.
take over and be like that. This means that we should do Star Wars anime and just like take over the
No, yeah.
original.
There's such a thing as
studios.
oversaturation, and then you lose quality because you're just like pumping out a bunch of things, and it's just a fine line, to
Yeah, but I'm very excited.
But I'm really excited. So
Awesome. So I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
good for today. Before we wrap up, though, Xanthe, where can everybody find you on the socials and everything?
I would love you to check out Star Wars Music Minute, either on your podcast platforms or on YouTube, where I also do additional content, and I will be, doing music commentary for Visions and all the new shows and stuff that come out. Also, if you want to follow my personal accounts, where I also talk a lot about Star Wars and play a lot of music stuff, I'm at Xanthe Tan. So Xanthe is short for Xanthe. ChrysantheTan. And yeah, I mean, I as an artist myself, I have music on Spotify, and there's a lot of music out there, and records you can hear me on playing violin on and stuff like that. So yeah,
Really
that's where
good.
you can find me.
Awesome.
Don't worry,
And
we're
we'll
gonna
definitely
leave links to
leave
everything.
links to that
Yeah.
so that everyone can find it. So make sure to check it out. And again,
next
thank you so
season-
much.
Oh, sorry. I was going to
Yes.
say
Oh, no.
my
Keep going,
Last
keep
Jedi
going.
season, 5 minutes at a time, is
Right.
about to wrap up. But the next film that I'm going to be starting with the 5 minutes at a time is A New Hope. So
Oh,
look out for that.
Awesome.
And I
Very
hope that,
exciting.
I hope that you all would like to be guests one day.
Oh, just let us know.
We'll be
We will all- yes.
honored and flattered.
We would be very honored. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining us. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. This has been really, really great. So thank you so much. We are Triad of the Force. You can find us whatever podcast can be found, YouTube, Instagram, just search Triad of the Force. We have shirts and stuff too. So until next time, may the Force be with you.